At midnight, every fossil fuel is gone. Crude oil, natural gas, coal. No petrol or gasoline depending on where you live. No diesel, jet fuel, heating gas, or coal-fired power. By morning, airports are grounding flights and petrol stations are useless. But at 7:12, the crisis reaches somewhere less obvious, your breakfast. The wheat in a slice of bread is usually grown with nitrogen fertilizer, and most of the world's ammonia, the starting point for that fertilizer, is made with fossil fuels. Your car stops today. The frightening question is, what happens at the next harvest? Why should a loaf of bread depend on gas in the first place? The oil shock hits first because transport drinks liquid fuel. Refineries can no longer turn crude oil into petrol, gasoline, diesel, kerosene, or marine fuel. Petrol cars stop as their tanks empty. Diesel trucks, tractors, and emergency generators follow. Most aircraft are grounded because batteries are far too heavy for today's long-haul routes, and cargo ships cannot replace their engines and fuel systems overnight. Electric cars and trains still work wherever the grid works, so movement does not end. It fractures which vehicles receive the remaining stored fuel: ambulances, food lorries, or military convoys. And when those reserves are gone, what fails next? The answer is not another engine. It is the material economy behind it. Oil and gas do two jobs. The obvious one is energy. The hidden one is chemistry. Refineries and chemical plants turn their molecules into plastics, solvents, paints, synthetic rubber, fibers, detergents, asphalt, and components used in medicines. Natural gas supplies the hydrogen used to make most ammonia. Existing plastic does not vanish, of course, and neither does carbon. Carbon is an element found in living things, the atmosphere, and rocks. What has disappeared in this scenario is the concentrated fossil supply of coal, oil, and gas. Burn those fuels and the energy is spent. Build with them and the material may last for decades. So after the tank's empty, which shelves follow? For food, the answer begins in the air. Every wheat plant needs nitrogen. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, so why buy it in a sack? Because atmospheric nitrogen is locked in pairs by one of chemistry's strongest bonds. Crops cannot simply breathe it in. A few bacteria can unlock it. Lightning can too. Then Fritz Haber found a way to force nitrogen and hydrogen into ammonia, and Karl Bosch turned that reaction into an industry. High pressure, high temperature, iron catalyst, more than 70. By September, nitrogen fertilizer prices were about 149% higher than a year earlier. The gas had not disappeared, it had merely become expensive. Britain received a smaller warning in 2021. Fertilizer plants closed, their carbon dioxide byproduct vanished with them, and the government paid to restart the plant because food processors needed that gas. One broken link had reached farms, meat plants, and supermarket packaging. If expensive gas could do that, what would no gas do to the next harvest? Farmers would stretch existing stocks. They would use more manure, rotate in legumes, and cut fertilizer where the yield loss hurts least. That buys time. It does not replace a global ammonia industry overnight. Then comes the rest of the fuel bill. Diesel works the tractor and combine. Fuel moves grain to the mill, flour to the bakery, and bread to the shop. So does food vanish on day one? No. The sequence is crueler than that. First, the cost rises. Then farmers change what they plant. Only later does the smaller harvest arrive. What does the shopper see while that clock is running? At first, the shop still looks normal. The numbers on the labels do not. Fresh produce flown across continents becomes a luxury. Low-margin staples are reformulated, rationed, or quietly dropped. Deliveries grow less frequent, so anything perishable becomes riskier to stock. The cruel detail is that the cheapest food is often the most sensitive to transport and fertilizer costs. Empty shelves make dramatic pictures, unaffordable shelves do more damage. But why can another country not simply ship in the missing supply? Because that rescue plan has a fuel tank of its own. Around 80% of international trade in goods, measured by volume, travels by sea. Those ships can eventually run on methanol, ammonia, biofuels, or other low-carbon options, but engines, ports, and fuel supply cannot all be replaced in a weekend. With conventional marine fuel gone, freight capacity becomes something governments ration. Grain or garden furniture, insulin or trainers, machine parts or televisions. Every cargo left at the dock stops at another factory somewhere else. So which shipment jumps the queue? The answer gets uncomfortable when the destination is a hospital. Walk through one operating theater and count the petrochemicals. Syringes, cannulas, tubing, masks, drapes, gloves, sterile packaging, the bag holding a patient strip. Single use is not laziness there, it is infection control. Hospitals could sterilize and reuse more equipment, and they would. But replacement materials need factories, approvals, and time. The first response would be ruthless prioritization, postpone what can wait, and protect what cannot. Yet plastic is only the visible dependency. What about the steel in the instruments and the concrete around the world? Coal gets less attention at the petrol station because nobody pours it into a car, yet its disappearance tears through power and heavy industry. Thermal coal still generates electricity in many countries. Metallurgical coal becomes coke for blast furnaces, where carbon does more than provide heat, it helps pull oxygen away from iron ore. Without it, conventional production of new steel stops. Cement kilns also lose a major fuel source, though cement has a second problem. Limestone releases carbon dioxide as it becomes clinker, whatever heats the kiln. Electric arc furnaces can recycle scrap steel, but scrap cannot supply every new bridge, rail line, and wind turbine. What must grow to replace coal in these industries? Vast supplies of clean electricity and, for some processes, hydrogen. So can the grid carry that new burden? Only if it survives the first shock. Coal and gas-fired stations go silent immediately. Oil-fired generation disappears too, especially from islands and isolated grids that rely on it. Wind turbines keep turning. Solar panels, hydro dams, and nuclear plants keep producing. Yet losing all fossil generation at the same moment leaves many regions with a hole too large to manage. A grid is not a bucket of electricity. Supply and demand must match from moment to moment. Lose that balance, and protective systems disconnect equipment before it's damaged. Could batteries fill the hole? For some gaps, brilliantly. For this one, not yet. Batteries react faster than gas turbines and are excellent at smoothing seconds or hours. Reservoir hydropower can respond quickly too. Nuclear can provide steady output. The difficult gap lasts through long windless periods, winter peaks, and regions with weak transmission. Gas currently covers part of that job in many countries because it is dispatchable. Operators can call for power when they need it. Remove gas and coal before storage, transmission, and clean firm tower are ready, and the problem is not whether clean electricity works, it is whether enough of it arrives in the right place at the right hour. How quickly would that mismatch spread into daily life? In the impossible overnight version, the clock starts in seconds. Coal and gas-heavy grids trip or ration power. Within hours, petrol cars form queues for fuel that will never be delivered. Within days, diesel freight, shipping, and aviation shrink to whatever governments have in strategic stocks. Gas heating fails where no electric replacement exists. Steel mills, cement works, refineries, and chemical plants stop when their fuel or feedstock disappears. Food already in warehouses keeps moving where electric rail, working ports, and emergency fuel allow it. The deeper blow waits for the agricultural calendar, the first planting season short of ammonia and diesel, then the first reduced harvest. When does the fuel emergency become a human emergency? When countries begin bidding against one another for the same ton of grain. By the second harvest, the damage is brutally uneven. Wealthy countries can pay more, redirect crops, cut waste, and subsidize farmers. Poor import-dependent countries face a harder bargain, a weaker currency, dearer freight, and exporters protecting their own shelves. The world would still grow food, but fewer calories would reach the people with the least purchasing power. By then, nobody would call it a fuel crisis. It would be a food crisis with an energy crisis buried inside it. Does that mean civilization ends when the wells run dry? No, because that is not how the wells will run dry. There will almost certainly be no final morning when every pump coughs air. An oil field declines. A mine becomes uneconomic. A gas project is cancelled, sanctioned, or replaced. At the same time, higher prices make some deposits worth developing and make alternatives more attractive. The quantity called a reserve changes with technology, price, and politics. Fossil fuels do not end like petrol in a tank. Their affordable flow tightens unevenly. Then why bother with the overnight nightmare? Because it exposes which parts of modern life still have no fast substitute. The easy barrels are not magically produced first everywhere, but mature fields do decline, and replacing them can demand deeper wells, richer locations, more processing, and more capital. Scarcity can also arrive for political reasons long before geology forces it. The result looks less like a countdown and more like a series of price shocks, supply cuts, and rushed substitutions. A resource can remain underground and still be useless to the family that cannot afford what it makes. The meaningful deadline is not the last barrel. It is the last stretch of time in which replacement can still be orderly. Are we using that time on the hardest problems? Each fossil fuel leaves a different hole. Oil takes petrol, diesel, jet fuel, shipping fuel, and petrochemical feedstocks with it. Natural gas takes heating, flexible power, and most ammonia production. Coal takes a major source of electricity and the conventional route to new steel. Cars, buildings, and much low-temperature industry can be electrified. The stubborn list is fertilizer, new steel, cement, ocean shipping, and aviation. None is impossible to replace. All are difficult to replace cheaply, quickly, and at global scale. The real question is not how much fossil fuel remains underground. It is how much dependence remains when the next shock arrives. Are the difficult sectors moving? Yes, but the scale of the answer matters more than the headline. In Denmark, a demonstration plant opened in 2024 to make ammonia with renewable hydrogen and to flex its output with the power supply. In northern Sweden, construction began on a large plant designed to make iron with hydrogen instead of coal. Electric arc furnaces already turn scrap into new steel around the world. Marine engine makers have tested ammonia, although ammonia-fueled ships are not yet a mature global fleet. So the chemistry works. What has not arrived is enough cheap equipment, clean power, and infrastructure to replace the old system everywhere. While that scale is being built, what changes for ordinary life? Distance becomes expensive again. A world using far less fossil fuel is not automatically a world without cars, hospitals, or full shops. It is a world that wastes less fuel on jobs electricity can do better and saves scarce molecules for jobs that genuinely need them. Supply chains grow more diverse. Repair matters more. Some heavy industry moves closer to abundant clean power. Flying and shipping stop feeling nearly free, so distance returns to the price tag. Is that collapse? Only if the transition is left until scarcity makes every decision for us. Managed early, it is a redesign, disruptive, expensive, and entirely survivable. For more than a century, we have used ancient sunlight to pull nitrogen from the air, move food across oceans, and make ordinary objects astonishingly cheap. It worked so well that the fuel disappeared from the story. Put it back, and the ending changes. Running out is not one dramatic day. It is a narrowing set of choices. The question is not whether humanity can live without fossil fuels. We can. The question is how many essential systems will still depend on them when the cheap, reliable supply stops showing up. That answer is being built now. One fertilizer plant, one furnace, and one ship at a time.